Welcome to BizTech's Enterprise Technology Show, the show where we feature tech companies operating globally, talking about their businesses and solutions and how they make a difference to their customers' businesses. Now, today our conversation is with Angus McDougall, Regional Vice President, Asia Pacific and Japan at Entrust. Entrust was founded in 1994 and is headquartered in Minneapolis in the US. It's a global leader in trusted identity, payments, and data protection. Now, here to tell us more is Angus. Angus, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Great to be here with you.
Now, Angus, could you start by giving us an overview of Entrust and its history?
Most certainly, Brian. I actually joined the organization in 2005, so I've been around for the better part of 17 years in this company and watched it as it's evolved from where it was back in those days to where it is today. But as you say, Entrust as a company was formed in 1994, but earlier to that, the original entity was an organization called DataCard Corporation that was formed in 1969, so we've been around for about 53 years. And DataCard was actually a collection of 4 engineers who were commissioned by Visa to build a high volume device to issue credit and debit cards at this time, as the industry was starting to take off from cash to card-based payments in the United States. So that platform was subsequently commercialized and became very successful over the next few decades. Subsequently, in 1987, our organization was acquired by the very prominent German family called the Quants, who remain our private owner to this day.
And they also owned a large shareholding in BMW, correct?
They are, in fact, the principal shareholder of BMW, and I believe one of the older patriarchs of the family was the founder of BMW. But yes, they're most known for automobiles, but they've certainly got a number of interests in technology and other companies around the globe as part of their family office, of which Entrust Corporation is one of those. So fast forward from those days in 87 to 2013 is when we actually acquired Entrust, and we subsequently changed the name in 2020. And the rationale for the acquisition was really the evolving technology landscape, such as it is, in terms of our traditional strengths have been built on providing hardware and software in a predominantly electromechanical environment to make and manufacture and personalize credit, debit, identity cards, any form of identity or payment verification done in our machines, to the point where, I can virtually say with any degree of assurance to anyone in Singapore that any card in their wallet, whether it be purse or wallet, is actually done on an Entrust machine here in Singapore, is made on an Entrust machine. We have pretty close to 100% market share in places like Singapore, Australia, and Japan. And in other places it varies from those numbers, but certainly we're a very prominent player in that space. But in terms of the Entrust acquisition in 2014, Brian, it was really about recognizing that as the world moves to more of a digital footprint, it was important for us to evolve with the times. And we saw that the security elements that came with the Entrust acquisition were completely in sync with our legacy and history that we'd carved out for ourselves in payments and identity.
Could you give us an idea of your product and services solution that you offer customers now in the Asia Pacific region, and tell us how they use your solutions?
Absolutely. So our traditional, and we call it the traditional part of the business involving payments and identity, is used by governments, is used by banking institutions, is used by commercial organizations and educational institutes as well around Asia Pacific to provide both identity and payment mechanisms. So a good example is someone like the Singapore American School, where they utilize our printers to produce cards. They then use those cards as a mechanism to orchestrate payments for on-campus purchases, whether it be in the food shop or a bookstore, whatever it may be, and ensuring that this acts as some sort of e-wallet device. So that's quite a common element across our markets. And then, of course, anything to do with identity, things like driver's licenses, passports, national ID cards. Where you're based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, we've been doing the national ID card in Malaysia for more than 20 years, working with local partners there. And that's an important part of our business. Now, of course, with the Entrust acquisition, that product portfolio has extended to more of contemporary security platforms in areas like PKI authentication, the SSL, the digital certificate that sits on secured websites to verify that they are who they say they are.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these different dimensions are important in terms of growing the business. Now, we've also incorporated various acquisitions in the last 5 or 6 years, Brian, which have really supplemented that security portfolio. So one of the most significant was the purchase of one of the prominent hardware security module companies, Encipher, which was acquired by us in 2019. And this provides the necessary platform to encrypt data streams for transmission and to ensure security within the cloud of these data streams. So it's a very important acquisition. And as you can see, all of this is linked to the various security components based on our payment and identity credentials that we have in this industry. There is a common link there.
And Angus, it's really quite interesting because when I was doing the research for this, you could see a thread, obviously with the benefit of hindsight, that this is a company with a lot of legacy solutions that then acquired businesses to future-proof itself.
Yes, exactly. And we've had to go through those difficult decisions and make those calls. And it is challenging because obviously we're playing with our owners' money. We need to ensure that every bet that we place is a winner and make sure that we deliver on our metrics that we're looking to achieve with those acquisitions. So that's been very important, a part of it. But as you know, as I mentioned to you earlier on, when I came into this company in 2005, I thought at the time this is a very interesting organization. And fast forward all these years later, I still think it's very much the same. And in fact, our best years are ahead of us. And we're laying the foundations for future growth, as you say, future-proofing our organization so that we can evolve with the times, we can remain relevant, we can ensure that decision makers in our chosen markets continue to value Entrust as a partner and continue to select our products and software offerings to secure their organizations.
Now, in light of that, I think you did a study recently on the great payments disruption.
Yes.
Could you share some insights and key takeaways from that study?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was an interesting session that we went through in terms of the exercise of coming up with this report for the Great Payments Disruption. It was launched in March of 2022, so it's very recent. We actually had a press release it was dated March the 9th. It was a study conducted across 9 different countries around the globe, embracing about 1,500 consumers who had confirmed that they had undertaken some form of digital payment in the previous 12 months. And what we were trying to do was to understand how is consumer behavior evolving in payments and what does it mean for our industry and especially for banks. In terms of the countries that we focused on within Asia, it was Indonesia, Australia, and Singapore. And it's only really there's nothing specific to those 3 countries that eliminate other countries, but it's more a function as we do these studies, which are so widely accessed through our website. We tend to just select countries and say, well, what's Japan thinking? What's Korea thinking? What's happening in Taiwan and so forth? Right. So in this case, it was Australia, Indonesia, and Singapore. And one of the interesting things to come out of this, Brian, was, and I wasn't aware of this, but Indonesia is actually the largest proportional user of digital platforms in the payments world, with some 65% of consumers have used some form of digital payment, and that could be crypto, that could be e-wallets like GrabPay, for example. Mm-hmm. But people there are really into it. And the other important consideration from this study was that more than 88% of people said they prefer doing their banking digitally. Now, all of this was post-COVID, so we kind of get the fact that people are reducing to minimize contact when they walk into a retail establishment. So, and also usage of things like ATMs, which could be a contaminated surface in some people's views, with many people touching it during the course of the day. But 88% of people prefer to do digital, and only 11% prefer to do in branch, on phone, or through a self-service device like an ATM. So again, I was very surprised with those sort of numbers and how there had been such a disruptive initiative occurring in our industry. That and that, as I say, some of it is partly due to COVID, but certainly this is the way it's trending.
Well, what's interesting about your study is this: if you take those 3 countries, for example, 2 of those countries are early adopters of electronic payments. So Australia, very early on, even a decade ago, people hardly use cash. Singapore, the same thing. Indonesia, however, that's been a complete leapfrog.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of it is the banking industry is reaching out to folks who historically have not had access to traditional bank accounts the way you and I may have grown up with, but now through the use of mobile technologies have access to such a service. So it is quite extraordinary. But as you say, Australia has been on the leading edge. When EFT first became prevalent in the 1990s, Australia was streets ahead of the US in terms of the adoption of payment directly from the bank account to the merchant's account, and that was very prominent. And of course today and I've just come back from Australia actually last week, and what I saw there continued to reaffirm to me that cash is basically dying in that market, and people use either their card through a contactless device, so it's tap and go, or they use their phone, and there's still a very strong preference towards using the card simply because of the utility of the card. You never have a battery that runs down in a card, and also the fact that you don't need to enter a PIN number to access the capabilities of the mobile wallet on the phone. So, it's very prominent. People love it. It's secure. And that's really what the other thing that came out of this study is that consumers are looking for great user experiences, but also they want to ensure that their privacy is protected and that the platform is completely secure. And if that's the case, I'll be very, very happy.
And in that case also, I want to swing into the fact that the last 2 years, Angus, the digital transformation has taken place at an enormous rate. And the priorities for IT leaders have obviously shifted tremendously. So we've had a lot of innovation and shift to either hybrid working, e-enablement of customers and so forth, not only in the financial services industry, but across different industries. What have you seen then that has shaped then CIOs thinking then and then now?
In regards to hybrid work environments?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So look, this is clearly an area that we see as tremendous potential with the capabilities of the Entrust portfolio. And it's interesting when you interview people now, Brian, one of the almost immediate questions is, what's your company's policy in regards to, work environments? Is it come to the office every day? Is it hybrid? Is it work from home? How do you feel about all this sort of thing? And as you know, we had to very much invent this stuff on the fly because of the ubiquitous nature of the coronavirus outbreak back in early 2020. And we had to move quickly to work from home environment. And of course, to your question around what a CIO is looking for, well, clearly they're looking towards ensuring that there is a major focus around data security at home. To the point, there's a common phrase now used within the industry of zero trust, which is primarily based on the fact that you have to ensure that people only have access to those systems that they are designated to have access to. And there should be a process of continuous validation to ensure that the integrity of all your systems are being maintained. And these are the sorts of considerations that are very important for CIOs. So they're looking for answers. What can you do for me in regards to ensuring that we maintain the integrity of our data security? How do we protect our data in the cloud? What can you offer in that area? And so all these different areas are starting to come into play. And this is where we come into the picture by offering our our solutions based from the Entrust portfolio, which could be around authentication, security pertaining to the virtual private network, single sign-on, mobile identity, all this sort of thing, to ensure that we are providing the requisite security infrastructure the CIOs are looking for.
But Angus, this is a very complex environment now. It pre-COVID, a lot of stuff was on-premise. Now it's either a single source cloud provider or in some cases multi-cloud providers.
Yes.
What are some of the security considerations that you've got to juggle?
Well, this is almost a race with no finish line, Brian, because there are threats out there that we don't even know about. And you know, a lot of it comes down to training as well of the staff. And what I think we as an organization, as supposedly a thought leader in this industry, have done a pretty good job in terms of helping our staff adapt to the threat environment. You know, and one of the considerations is the fact that we are going through probably about a monthly exercise, and it's never publicized in advance. But our staff will receive a phishing email, a test email. And of course, if you click on it, then you'll be admonished through a return saying this is a test and you've just failed it, and here's what you need to do to educate yourself on how to become better at recognizing these potential threats. And of course, if you push it through to the network control center to be verified as a suspicious email, then you get a pat on the back and say, well done. And we collect those statistics and make sure that we're trending in the right area, trending in the right direction, and ensuring that we are putting in place the requisite training around people recognizing potential threats.
That's such an interesting idea, because the points of failure for cybersecurity are often the individual,
yes,
not the systems and the plans. So education of your team and your employees is really a fundamental way to reduce the threat of bad actors getting into your systems.
Yes, absolutely the case, Brian. And, you know, we've got new people coming to the organization all the time. We have to educate them and make sure that they are compliant. And often I ask people the question, tell me about where you've come from and what sort of training you had. And I would say that more than half of people haven't had any training at all, which is really interesting. Now, if you come from an industry player in the security arena, you'd expect us to at least have some degree of focus on this, and we do. And as I say, I think we do a pretty reasonable job. And I think comparisons in April of 2022 compared to, say, 3 years ago would show vast improvement in terms of people recognizing the threats that are out there. But I think about, you know, this extends to our own families as well. How do I educate my two daughters around these sort of threats so they don't have their identity compromised by clicking on some suspicious link that ends up releasing data to a party that shouldn't have access to it? So all of these different things are important. And I think as I said, it's a race with no finish line. You've got to be constantly ensuring that it's top of mind for your employees and making sure they understand the threat and they have a personal stake in the outcome for the company. Really important. You know, it can't just be left to a CIO or a CISO to say, well, we've got to do this and we've got to put in place the requisite technical structures to protect our organization. It comes down to the responsibility of each and every individual.
And how about, you know, the threat in terms of customer data? Companies are now increasingly focused on making sure that their customer data is safe.
Yes.
Encryption seems to be the way that most people think about in terms of protecting the customer data. What other methods are there, and what is the rate of implementation among companies in the Asia Pacific region?
So that's perhaps if I can start with the second question first, if you wouldn't mind, Brian, because I think that sort of lays the foundation for context in the first part of the question. So interesting, we just did a study that's available on our website around the global encryption studies trends that are occurring. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Global encryption trends study that, and this was, I think, about 16 different countries around the world. We looked at most of the major countries in Asia Pacific as part of that. The the global number for organizations that have a encryption strategy that is executed and constantly being implemented and reinforced is around 50% of global organizations. Now, let's bring that a step down to Asia and say, what does it mean for Asia? In Asia Pacific, we saw Japan was at 60%, which was the highest in the world. Australia, Korea, and Hong Kong were in the mid-50s, and the ASEAN countries were averaging 36%. So
Okay.
there's still a long way to go with just over 1/3 of organizations in our part of the world that are really need to look at this and say, what can we do to provide a greater degree of security through encryption of our data? And of course, as you say, the biggest issue, the primary issue is how do we protect our customers' data and make sure that isn't compromised, because there is nothing that will ruin your reputation faster than having a data breach. And as you know, we've seen some interesting examples in recent years. So what can be done to address this? And this is really the key question once we look at where the trends are occurring. I mean, clearly one of the things that we did in 2019 was to buy the Encipher organization, which provides a requisite hardware component through, we call them HSMs, hardware security modules, which goes through the process of encrypting data streams and providing that sort of capability and protection, and making it difficult for data that you don't want to be compromised to be viewed by an external party. So that's clearly very important. But there are many other techniques today, and we've talked about some of the things around the issues here. But how do we protect customers' data? If we relate it back to payments, Brian, we're seeing new techniques coming into the market through dynamic CVVs. So the ubiquitous verification, 3-digit or 4-digit verification, 3-digit in the case of MasterCard and Visa, 4 digits in the case of American Express, but is used to confirm as an extra source of confirmation that the payment is legitimate. We're seeing what they call an electronic ink screen being embedded in the card now, and that CVV will be a dynamic CVV number. So today you have if you're using a Visa, have a 3-digit card on a 3-digit number on the back of your card, and that number would be dynamic in this environment. And again, if your payment credentials are compromised, without the dynamic CVV, nothing can be done with that data, which is a really solid way of doing it. Now, it's not inexpensive, but it is something that's starting to become more and more popular to ensure that transactions cannot be compromised. The other area that is also seeing the greater level of interest as well beyond this is biometrics in the card. So it may well be that you have a fingerprint reader on your card, and before you undertake a transaction, you quickly press your finger onto the reader. It confirms that it matches your fingerprints with those of what's embedded in the card, and confirms the transaction can then go ahead, and is given a specific amount of time for that transaction to be completed. So all of these different techniques are all about securing data, whether it be in the cloud or at the point of sale or point of service, and ensuring that the transaction is as secure as it possibly can be.
Now, Angus, coming back to Entrust and your plans and objectives for 2022 in the Asia Pacific region, what are the key focus areas?
So fundamentally, we want to keep growing at a double-digit rate we've been growing at, and we should be with the way that there is such significant demand in the marketplace for what we have to offer. But clearly, the areas for growth that we see in Asia Pacific, we talked about the hybrid work environment. That's very, very key. We are seeing a real push towards the zero trust area, and how do we protect the customer's data in the cloud environment. So that's very, very key as well. But the whole digital transformation space, mobility, how do we implement, how do we provide the right sort of environment for cards, for payments not only to be undertaken through physical means through a card, but also digital cards as well. So these are the areas that we see as the greatest opportunity for growth. But I strongly believe, Brian, that as a company, our best days are ahead of us. And we've done a very good job in terms of our growth strategy through the acquisitions that I talked about earlier in this discussion, but also through organic means and ensuring that we continue to put in place the right distribution strategy in Asia Pacific. We work with the right distribution partners. We have a high win rate in our major projects with government customers, with financial customers, and ensuring that we lay the foundations for future growth constantly. It's a challenging environment out there right now with all of the different headwinds that we face. We have, volatility of stock markets, Brian. We have a situation in Europe, in Russia and Ukraine. And of course, we have an inflationary environment which is driving interest rates up to try and control inflation, and people questioning, well, we need to be really sure before we make this investment that we can see a significant return in a reasonable period of time. And there's no question that consumers in Asia Pacific are becoming more and more judicious around how they spend their IT dollars. And it's our job to ensure that we justify their belief in us, and we can ensure that we deliver a decent return on investment for their for their confidence in Entrust.
Now, Angus, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
My pleasure, Brian. Real pleasure to see you, and all the best to you and everyone at BizTech.
Thank you. I'm Brian Fernandez, and I've been speaking to Angus McDougall, Regional Vice President, Asia Pacific and Japan at Entrust, on BizTech's Enterprise Technology Show. This video and podcast will be on our various social media platforms, as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please like and subscribe to our various platforms. Thanks again for tuning in.